Okay, everybody should have gotten that. We're recording. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm really excited. This is our fourth briefing, and I'm really excited for this one. So good afternoon. The Wyoming Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights shall come to order on November 6th at 12:30 Mountain Time. And today is the fourth in a series of several Zoom briefings in which we're examining potential housing discrimination and fair housing practices in the state of Wyoming. I want to start by just making sure all folks know the meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our public database. You can contact our support specialist, Liliana Schiller, at lschiller@usccr.gov if you wish to obtain those records. First, I'd like to conduct a roll call, I see Valerie Thompson-Ebanks, Judy Shepard, and me as committee members. Did I miss anyone from the committee who's joined? No?
We have Sally Sato joining. Sorry.
We have who? Sorry?
Sally Sato.
Oh, terrific. There we go. Her name had not yet popped up on my screen. Sally Sato as well. Good afternoon, Sally. Thank you so much for joining. Also, so that's the committee members present. Also present today are commission staff, Kayla Fahoda, who is our designated federal officer, and Liliana Schiller, our support specialist. This is a public meeting and it's open to media and the general public. Just by way of background, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is an independent, bipartisan, non-enforcement agency of the federal government charged with studying discrimination or denial of equal protection because of the laws, or protection of the laws rather, because of race, color, religion, sex, age, disability, or national origin, or in the administration of justice. In each of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, in each of the 5 U.S. territories and Commonwealth, an advisory committee to the commission has been established, and they're made up of bipartisan persons who serve without compensation to advise the commission on relevant information concerning their respective state. Based on information collected through testimony gathered at these briefings, the committee, this committee in particular, will draft a report containing findings and recommendations that then will be shared with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. The commission will then forward those recommendations to the appropriate federal and state agencies. So a couple of rules for today's briefing. If you'd like to view closed captions, please click the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. All of the attendees will be muted to capture high quality audio for the recording. Committee members and members of the general public will have a chance to speak after the panelists' presentations. Please use the raise your hand feature on your Zoom screen, or if you're on the phone, press *9 and indicate that you'd like to speak. The audio will be muted until recognized for speaking. In this meeting and in future briefings and business meetings, the chat function in the Zoom is turned off to make sure that all participants have access to the discussion at hand, and to make sure that it's all a matter of public record. Though some of the statements made today may be controversial, we want to ensure that all guests don't defame or degrade any person or organization. So as chair, I reserve the privilege to cut short any statement or question that defames, degrades, or does not pertain to the issue at hand. And I may interrupt if necessary to refrain folks from doing so. Today, we're going to hear from several experts and others who have worked on policy related to potential housing discrimination in Wyoming. We have 3 presenters. We'll have plenty of time, but if you keep your remarks, say, to 15 minutes, that will give us plenty of time for Q&A and to make sure we're able to follow up any of the points you make. Today, we're going to hear from the following panelists: Laurie Urbigkit, who's Policy Director of the Wyoming Realtors; Laurie Gray, who's Housing Coordinator at the Wyoming Community Development Authority; and then finally, Liz Storr, who's a representative from the Wyoming Legislature. She'll join us a little later, about 2:15, so we'll be taking some questions and answers in the meantime. And typically, we would wait till the end for Q&A, but I think what we'd like to do today, particularly given timing, is go ahead and ask the presenters to speak, and then we will have a question and answer session directly after each presentation. So members of the committee and any members of the public, please feel free to make sure you keep track of any questions you have, because as soon as Laurie finishes, we'll start with questions for her and then move to Laurie Gray after that. So that'll be the game plan for today. So Laurie Urbigkit, I think you're our first briefer. If you would, please feel free to take the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be with you today. I'm actually not the policy director for the Wyoming Realtors. I'm the government affairs director. Policy is set by the board of directors, and it is just my job to carry it out. So I'm not the director, I'm the government affairs director.
No problem. Thank you for making that clear.
That's fine. So the Wyoming Realtors are committed to fair housing. We have been for many, many years. We have a strong statement in our Code of Ethics that talks about duties to the public in Article 10, and talks about fair housing, and that we will not be part of any discrimination based on the original 9 classifications, and then adding a few years ago, we added sexual orientation or gender identity as well. Then a couple of years ago, we took it one step farther and decided that we need to look internally and make certain that we're not doing anything that's discriminatory in our offices, in our brokerage relationships with other brokerages. So we added another section that it was always implicit that that's kind of how, what we meant, but we added stronger language in our Article 2 dealing with anti-discrimination, and the Wyoming Realtors, along with the National Association of Realtors, are committed to that. I think it was in 2015, I might be off by a year or 2 ago, but we worked very diligently to pass the Wyoming Fair Housing Act. We were instructed at that time that if we had an act that was substantially equivalent to the Federal Fair Housing Act, that Wyoming could take over the enforcement of it, which we felt would be a benefit not only to our members that may or may not be accused of fair housing violations, but certainly to the general public, because they'd have someplace locally they could go, someone in the state that they could talk to. And it was our hope that some of these complaints could be resolved at a much quicker pace. I know of issues that happened many years ago when I was selling real estate in Riverton, and there were 3 complaints filed by the same individual, and it took like 18 months for it to be resolved. We just felt that was not fair to the public by any means, and certainly didn't do any good for anybody in the entire process. So our belief was that bringing it home to Wyoming was a good idea. At the time, the individual that I was dealing with from HUD, the HUD office in Denver, told me to get a hold of North Dakota's language and plagiarize it as directly as possible, and that we would then be in substantial compliance. And so that's what we did. There might have been a tweak here or 2 here or there in some of the language, but we were assured that we were still in substantial compliance. So what happened from there? Well, the governor at the time was Governor Meade, and he actually threatened to veto it, but then he took pity upon us and decided he'd go ahead and sign the bill. But he said we had to work with the Attorney General's office to figure out how it would be enforced, which we promised we would do. Then when we met with the Attorney General after session was over, he seemed completely blindsided that this was even happening. So to make it short, what happened was that the bill passed. We have a state fair housing law in Wyoming that is substantially equivalent to the federal, and it has never been given to an entity for enforcement. It just sits there. We have visited with Governor Gordon about it. In fact, just last month, I visited with him again about it and said, we need to have this conversation and it needs to happen. So he has a new policy individual at in the governor's office, Chad Auer, A-U-E-R. I have met with Chad, and he's a delightful guy, and I assured him that I would be calling to make an appointment to have a serious conversation about getting this housed somewhere. And I personally think it belongs at the in the Attorney General's office under the Consumer Complaints Division. I think that's a natural fit for it, but we'll see. So what my hope is that your committee will agree that that needs to happen, and then maybe when we add a second voice besides just the realtors, maybe we can get something moving a little more rapidly. No legislation is necessary. All he has to do is just assign it to a division, a department, an agency, somebody to enforce it. So that's where the realtors are. We are still committed to getting this done. And I will tell you that it will be my goal to have this resolved before the end of 2024. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Laurie. That is really helpful. Just a couple of quick questions I'd have, and then and I think Kayla, then we just go around the committee and ask whether the committee has any questions, correct? Anyone else does?
Yeah. That's correct.
So just a couple quick ones. First, if it were to be the Wyoming Fair Housing Act were to be assigned to a particular entity for enforcement, I assume that would come along with the need for some budget to do so, to go ahead and take on the task of enforcement. Was that right, Laurie?
I'm certain that they would look at that, but I've also been told that HUD has a program available and that's why it's important to have it be substantially equivalent to the Federal Fair Housing Act, that they actually would help fund the enforcement of it. And several years ago, and I haven't talked numbers with anybody recently, but several years ago, I was told when we were passing the bill that it would be somewhere in the realm of like $80,000, which could easily fund a full-time position in whatever department, division, agency to be that person.
Okay, good, excellent. And
that
I
was
think
several years ago.
Yeah, and I think we've heard from a person from HUD who explained this very same thing, that money is available so long as the act is substantially equivalent. I think the only place in which the HUD person identified, and as I recall from the briefing, where it wasn't, is with respect to sexual orientation, that was something that HUD would be looking for, and for similarity between the Wyoming Act and then the Federal Fair Housing Act.
And I do recall that conversation, and it seems to me that he still thought we would be okay, because we would be hard pressed in today's legislature to amend much of anything, and I'd be fearful for even bringing it forward for fear that it could go the wrong direction really fast. But I vaguely recall he said something about, because ours was substantially equivalent when it was passed, and that there was then rules that were promulgated that included sexual orientation. And so as long as we were abiding by those rules, that it would be okay. We'll have to dig deeper into that, but I kind of was left with the impression that we would probably still be okay.
Okay. So, and then just to add one other question, I'll probably ask Laurie Gray the same one. We had just two things. We had heard from the HUD person who said that there were 89 housing complaints that came out of Wyoming over a 5-year period, which he thought was relatively small. And then Laurie, your agency did a survey of 410 respondents, in which 35% of those, so roughly 120, reported witnessing housing discrimination. I just wondered, when you kind of compare the difference between housing discrimination witnessed versus complaints made, whether some of those housing discrimination events might have been better remedied if there was local enforcement and a local place for people to go. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Laurie, just given the discrepancy in numbers.
I mean, and I think that that discrepancy in the numbers is right to the point. A lot of people are not going to call the federal government. they don't, find the right phone number in Denver to get to the right person. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we, as the Wyoming Realtors, as an association, we need to be letting people know that, especially if we can get this housed in Wyoming, that here's who you call. This is Wyoming, and you can call these people and they will investigate and they will get to the bottom of this. Because it hurts my soul, it really does, to think that we have people being discriminated against and then they don't have anywhere to even go to report it or to feel that they can get some relief. And I feel it just breaks my heart to even think it's happening, but I guess I can't be Pollyanna forever. But I certainly think that could be an explanation, is that they simply don't know who to go to.
Yeah. And thank you, Laurie. And I just had one other question that I'd open it up to the rest of the committee. The one thing I know that has been done in the past is training. I think there's a number of different organizations in Wyoming who do train on discrimination in housing and sort of what's proper or not, and how do landlords react to difficulties with tenants and things like that. Is there any particular training that the Wyoming Realtors does around housing discrimination that helps realtors understand responsibilities?
Absolutely. We have in our required education, we have an entire section on federal fair housing, the act and the reality of it and the do's and don'ts. Absolutely. And that is a required course every 3 years. Then for the on the realtor side, we are required to take our code of ethics and professional standards training every 2 years. And there is an entire section on that as well.
Okay, thank you. Other committee members? Questions for Laurie?
I could chime in here. Hi, Laurie. Nice having you.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'm curious about if you're aware of discrimination or accusations pertaining to discriminations, and what are basically the nature of some of those that you are aware of?
And unfortunately, given that I'm government affairs, I do not really, I don't see those. We do, under our code of ethics, members of the public or other realtor members can file ethics complaints against a realtor member. And certainly our ethics require that there is no discrimination. And so whether there have been any of those filed based on fair housing, I don't have that information. I can check. I can check with our state office, but I don't even know if they, I have no idea if I can get that information or not, but I certainly will ask.
Thank you. So you just clarified something for me too, in terms of perhaps where those complaints would live. So you just talked about ethics complaint. Is that kind of what would be referenced, or if a complaint is made, it would fall under this umbrella? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's one place, one area that if someone felt they were discriminated on based on the protected classes, they can indeed file an ethics complaint against that realtor member with the local board of realtors. They don't have to, but they can. They also can, of course, file a complaint with HUD. They can file a complaint with the Real Estate Commission, although I think the Real Estate Commission would probably refer them to HUD or back to the local board of realtors. It is another avenue of seeking justice or redress if someone has been treated wrongly.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add, we probably need to do a better job making sure the public understands that as well. That if they do feel they have been discriminated against, here are some of your avenues that you can go down. Mm-hmm. And I think that's on us to do a better job letting the public know that.
Sure, thanks.
Great, thanks, Valerie. Other questions for Laurie? Committee members? Judy or Sally, if you haven't had any.
I have a question, and if it's already been covered, please forgive me for repeating, but this covers renters as well as purchasers. That would be right, Laurie.
Correct. And I will just say that an awful lot of our members also are property managers. So they come into contact with renters as well as buyers and sellers. So it certainly covers the rental market as well.
So if you don't go through a property manager and you privately control a rental property, the only redress you have is to go to HUD. Would that be correct?
Well, and then it gets kind of iffy because it depends on how many rental units you own and whether or not, like if you have a fourplex and you live in one, then are you exempt from some of this? So that gets, when it's the private owner, and I think they have to own, I should have looked this up. I think they have to own more than 4 units.
That is correct.
Yeah, 4 units or more. So if you only have one house that you're renting out and you live in another house, you're kind of exempt from federal fair housing, which I think is unfortunate, but that's the way the law was written.
Okay, that seems like a large market neglected by discrimination policy, right?
Well, and one of the reasons behind that originally, one of the reasons given behind that originally was because, well, if I own a duplex and I live in that duplex, I should be able to discriminate if I don't want a man living in the duplex next to me. I only want a woman. So I can discriminate based on sex because I live in that same building. Even though not in the same unit. That was kind of the original kind of excuse for that, if quite frankly. It was an excuse that we need to not bring in the individuals that just have 1 or 2 rental units.
Wow. Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Sally. Any other questions for Laurie? Any public questions for Laurie? Okay. Laurie, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
And I look forward to hearing your recommendations and working with you any way we can.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We will send you our recommendations for sure.
Super, thanks.
Great, thank you. Great. And I see Liz Storer joined us. Welcome, Representative Storer. Thank you for joining us as well. So I think then we go next to Laurie Gray on the schedule, if that works for everyone. Great. Laurie Gray, thank you for joining us. As I said, Laurie Gray is a housing coordinator for the Wyoming Community Development Authority, the agency in Wyoming really charged with housing here. And we thank you so much for your time, Laurie. Please proceed.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today regarding fair housing practices in Wyoming. Today, I'm going to focus my comments on Wyoming's multifamily or rental housing industry because we've just heard from an expert in the real estate and sales brokerage industry. As mentioned in the introduction, I'm the compliance officer for the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department at Wyoming Community Development Authority. WCDA is the allocating agency for the low-income housing tax credit governed by Section 42 of the Internal Revenue Code, or the LIHTC program. We are also the participating jurisdiction, or the PJ, for the Home Investment Partnership Program, or the HOME program. We are the state grantee for the National Housing Trust Fund, or the NHTF program, both of which are designated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Due to our low population in Wyoming, WCDA receives the small state minimum in all programs, all of which have their own calculation on how funds are allocated. In 2023, WCDA received $3.185 million in low-income housing tax credits, $3.5 million in home funds, and just over $3 million in National Housing Trust funds. As defined in our Affordable Housing Allocation Plan, which is approved by the Governor's Office, WCDA allocates these funds through a competitive application process to build or rehabilitate multifamily affordable housing throughout the state of Wyoming. Between 2019 and last month, or October of 2023, WCDA has had 521 multifamily units placed in service. We have 419 that are currently under construction, and we have an additional 128 that have been awarded, but yet to start in construction. As the compliance officer at WCDA, one of my many job duties is to monitor for compliance with the Fair Housing Act and the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, through our auditing and management oversight procedures. We also promote fair housing, VAWA, and equal opportunity education through annual training opportunities and regular fair housing educational email updates. Each year, WCDA hosts a compliance training, which provides a complete overview of the history of the Fair Housing Act, a complete overview of each of the protected classes, how to create and maintain non-discriminatory policies and procedures that will not have a disparate impact, and provides an overview on how to manage reasonable accommodations and modifications. April is Fair Housing Month, and each year WCDA sends weekly articles, links to HUD updates, and educational tools, including how to access VAWA information and HUD's website for reasonable accommodations. We also promote Wyoming's or our local Region 8 Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, or the FHEO office, Fair Housing Month training by sending invitations to all of our developers, owners, managers, and property management staff that owns or manages a project funded by WCDA. That said, we do know that there is housing discrimination in Wyoming, and it is always WCDA's goal to ensure that that does not happen within our federally funded housing portfolio. Unfortunately, our funded projects only comprise a small percentage of rental housing throughout the state. WCDA believes that increasing access to affordable housing, or increasing the affordable housing stock in Wyoming, will have the greatest impact on reducing fair housing violations and discriminations within our state. For our discussion, I would like to start off with some statistics on disability. The disability rate in the state is 12.9%, with a rate of disability increasing with age. For people over the age of 75, the rate of disability is over 48%. Households residing in publicly supported housing units in the state have disability rates over 30%. Considering our aging population and input from stakeholders, there is an expected need for additional accessible housing units in the state to meet current and future needs for households with disabilities. Per Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, WCDA requires that all units funded are accessible to those with disabilities. An additional 2% are accessible for persons with hearing or visual disabilities. We also fund projects that are specifically for seniors or those with disabilities, but this is only a small part of our funding. There is still a huge lack of affordable housing for both seniors and those with disabilities throughout the state. Many are over cost burdened in their current housing situation or with family or supportive services, and are on wait lists waiting to get into safe, affordable housing. Next, I would like to discuss affordability. HUD released 2024 fair market rents this year in September, which were just effective October 1st. Fair market rents are used as the basis for HUD to set rents for housing choice vouchers, and are critical to how rents are calculated for the LIHTC, bond, home, and NHTF programs. This year, the fair market rents across the United States saw a 10% increase, which is a substantial increase for the second consecutive year. This year, Wyoming was in the top 10 states with the highest increase in fair market rents at 13%. What does this mean for Wyoming citizens? It means increased rental rates, less affordability, lower access to housing within their means, and higher household cost burdens. A cost burden exists when a household spends more than 30% of its income on housing. A severe cost burden exists when a household spends more than 50% of its income on housing. Statewide, the rate of cost burdens is 22.2%, with 9.2% of those experiencing a severe cost burden. Those at the lowest income levels experience The highest experienced cost burdens at the highest rate of 69.9%. 53% of those were experiencing severe cost burdens. Furthermore, renter households are facing higher cost burdens than homeowners. The overall rate for housing cost burdens for renters is 34.7% compared to 16.9% for homeowner households. Of these, 15.8 of the renter households face severe cost burdens compared to only 6.6% of homeowner households. The highest rate of cost burdens by income is for the renters whose income is below 30% of HUD's area median family income, which experience cost burdens at a rate of 71.5%. In addition, the current state of the real estate market and high interest rates are locking potential buyers out of the purchase market, which has created a higher demand for the limited rental units available, creating an even larger burden for those with limited resources to try and find rental housing. Finally, the most important discussion is inventory and availability. As noted in the the Wyoming Fair Housing Practices Proposal Project that we are discussing today, there is a huge lack of affordable housing throughout the state of Wyoming. Notably, the shortage of affordable housing is worse for low income and extremely low income households, especially those that are under the 30% or poverty guideline of the area median income. Your findings note about 25% of Wyoming's renter population is in the extremely low income population, but there are only 13.5% of affordable homes available to those renters. This is a huge disparity in inventory versus need in Wyoming's low income population. In your brief, you also referenced 2 fair housing violations, one of which was in Cheyenne and the other was in Teton County. Regionally, households in the Southeast and Teton regions have the highest rates of unmet housing needs in our state. Teton having the highest at 28.9% and the Southeast just below at 27.4%. In 2023, the Jackson and Teton County Annual Housing Supply Plan approved in April of 23 that there are over 1,300 households seeking housing through the county's housing development programs. In addition, more than half of all the Sheriff's Department employees commute from outside Teton County, and more than a quarter of all of the school district, hospital, police, fire, EMS employees all commute into Teton County, many from out of state. In Cheyenne, statistics show that the area has a 98% overall occupancy rate across all rental housing with the growth pattern seen in Southeast Wyoming. Cheyenne needs an additional 1,800 affordable units to fill the community needs. Increased inventory and access to decent, safe, affordable housing in both of these communities, as well as most communities across the state of Wyoming, should inevitably reduce fair housing and discriminatory practices, as households at all income levels would have increased access to an affordable place called home. In your briefing, you asked me to answer 2 questions. What can the federal government, including Congress or the president, or the local or state government, do to address the issue? And that if resources or funding challenges were not a barrier, how might this issue be addressed? Regarding what the federal government could do to address the issue, we believe that increasing the small state minimum calculations for affordable housing programs would be a huge benefit for small states with growing population and a huge increase in property values and fair market rents. This would be most helpful in the amount of low-income housing tax credits that small states receive. Both the Home and the National Housing Trust Fund programs, when combined with tax credits, enable affordable housing deals to be financially secure and stable through construction and throughout their affordability period. Having a low annual allocation of tax credits inhibits us from utilizing all of the other HUD funding resources to ensure the health and viability of the projects that we fund throughout the state. If Congress or the president could pass legislation that would increase the allocation of tax credits, especially for small state minimums, it would be a huge benefit to addressing the low-income housing deficiency within our state and across the country. In regards to our local or state government, we would ask the governor's office and our state legislators to make affordable housing a priority throughout the state of Wyoming. Earlier this year, House Bill 132, creating the Wyoming Housing Trust Fund, died in committee and chambers for fear of too much government intervention and undermining the private industry. This bill was proposed to address the critical shortage of adequate affordable housing throughout the state. Wyoming is one of only 3 states that does not operate a state housing trust fund to fill the gaps of the state's affordable housing needs and that federal funding cannot address. So on a state level, creating and maintaining a Wyoming Housing Trust Fund with a focus to build or rehabilitate affordable housing throughout the state should be a priority. And we would ask our state and local governments to support this bill and work with legislators to get it passed in upcoming legislative sessions. Finally, if resources or challenges were not a barrier, how might the issue be addressed? I believe that I have just answered this, but I will reiterate, a focus on affordable housing should always be a main focus for all our leaders of the community at a local, county, state, and federal level. Increasing access and funding to safe, affordable housing at all income levels should have a positive impact on reducing any fair housing violations or discriminatory actions when there is housing available for all those who need it. Housing is critical to many facets of life, including physical and mental health, quality of life, access to education, economic outcomes, and among many others. Given this role, safe, stable, and affordable housing is a necessity to achieving many other human rights, including security and safety. Decent, safe, sanitary, affordable housing should never be an option. It should be a human right.
Great. Thank you so much, Laurie. And thank you very much for such a well-prepared presentation. I think you provided us with a lot of information that will be very helpful for our discussions. I think we've, in the past, saw affordability as certainly a key challenge for the state. The committee's kind of focused on protected classes, but that your presentation, I think, goes a long way to sort of tying the two together. If I could just ask a couple of quick questions, or then ask the committee for any that they may have.
Of course.
Really two questions, I guess. The Wyoming Community Development Agency actually prepared the Fair Housing Plan. I think that's part of what's necessary with respect to the HUD grants, and I think it's in draft form currently and going through a number of reviews. But there was a survey performed called the Wyoming Resident Needs Survey. And one of the questions I referenced earlier was, have you ever witnessed or experienced housing discrimination? And out of a total of 410 respondents, 141 responded yes. So roughly 35%. Do you want to any comment on that? And I know the WCDA also keeps track of housing complaints, and I saw in the report as well that you'd received, I can't remember, it was roughly over 100 fair housing complaints or discrimination complaints. Do you want to comment on that? Any follow-up, like what kind of discrimination people saw? What were the issues that were raised in the course of responding to the survey or in the complaints that were made? Any help you can give us there?
You bet. So most of the complaints that I have seen since I have been in this office, and I've been here almost 5 years, we of course have to refer all complaints to FHEO, but we do obviously, keep track and document. A lot of them had to do with access to due to disability and access to accessible housing. Some of the other complaints that I have seen in the 4 years that I have been also regarding sexual identity. I have had some in regarding to age and or disability. There are certain types of housing that when funded are only for those either 55 and older, 62 and older, or depending on the funding source, 62 and older and or disabled. So some of the complaints that I have seen too, we're just not understanding the different types of housing. But again, everything gets referred to FHEO and HUD Region 8.
And when you said FHO, that's the HUD portion of HUD that's responsible for fair housing, correct?
Yes, sir.
In Region 8, yeah. And in the survey, can you just give us a little? So 410 respondents. That was in a needs survey that was done, I think, regionally based upon meetings that were held around the state. Can you give us any sense of how the WCDA sees that survey and the results of it, whether it's indicative, helpful, something to take action on? How's it perceived?
I honestly was not part of that particular survey, but any information that we can get in regards to ensuring fair housing throughout our state, I think is a great tool for all of us to have. And I do also agree with our last speaker that it would be very helpful for the state of Wyoming to have a central location for all fair housing complaints to be heard. I think that that's one of the issues that we have is when someone comes to us and says that they feel that they were discriminated against. We provide them with all the tools on where to go, but having to contact the HUD office in Denver, it just seems very distant and cold. And I feel like having a local office, we would have a better handle on the discrimination that is happening throughout the state. I don't think that there is enough, let's say, overview or that information doesn't have a central point to be able for us to even have truly accurate data. How's that?
Thank you very much, Laurie. Just one more question, then I'll open it up. We've also been seeking out a travel perspective on housing discrimination in Wyoming, and I'm hoping we get to hear from a tribal representative as part of these briefings. But is there anything specific that you might help us with, Laurie? Any perspectives we should have that where discrimination or these kinds of issues are different on reservations and from a tribal perspective, and perhaps how at that intersection between the reservation and non-reservation, whether the tribal members face discrimination different than other Wyoming residents?
We work with the tribes in Riverton, and I would say that it would be important to hear from a tribal representative, because I feel a lot of that any of those particular complaints would be reported to either the Eastern Shoshone or the Northern Arapaho housing authorities. And I'm sure they hear most of the complaints. I would say that we have not funded affordable housing in Riverton since 2014, and we have a competitive application process that we go through. But I do know that Riverton definitely needs more affordable housing for the entire community. And of course, more tribal housing. And in regards to discrimination specifically, I think unfortunately, when housing is less available or harder to come by, I think unfortunately then you see higher increases of discrimination, because it's a competitive it's a competitive area and there is a lack of affordable housing there.
Great. Thank you, Laurie. Okay, thank you for all those answers to the question. Judy Shepherd, you had your hand up first, so please, would you go ahead?
Thank you, Jim. Laurie, I have heard that one of the things that is kind of a nationwide trend might be hitting Wyoming as well, and that is equity firms buying single family units and then renting them at a higher rate. Have you heard anything about this affecting housing affordability?
I have not. I do have friends that that work in the in Colorado, and I know that's a huge thing there. I have not heard of that here, but I would imagine you know, the places that you know could start being an issue would be the two regions that I did name in my comments, which would be Cheyenne and of course Teton County, because they are the affordability in those areas is becoming harder and harder. I don't have a specific percentage, but in the last 5 years, the cost of a house in Cheyenne has gone up exponentially. So it wouldn't surprise me to hear about it in those areas, but no, I have not heard about any of those personally. And again, we're the federal funding source. So we allocate the, you know, government funding. So I don't work as much in the private sector anymore. I did for years before joining WCDA. So no.
I had heard that in Laramie, this is beginning to happen, and we all know students trying to find housing in Laramie can be an issue, especially affordability. So that's why I was asking that. Thank you for your answer.
You bet.
Thanks, Judy. Sally, you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, you said that when there's a lack of affordable housing, that it gets competitive. So does that mean that you can charge what you want and whoever can afford it gets the housing?
Not in affordable housing. So in the housing that WCDA funds, there are specific rules and regulations set in place to ensure or try the best to ensure you know, that we're following fair housing. So in affordable housing, any of the programs that I just discussed, there are specific rules. They have to always maintain a wait list. They have to have a tenant selection guide with specific criteria on how they approve and deny all of their you know, any potential residents. They have to have specific reasons for denying, and everybody is worked through the housing list as of the date that they applied. But unfortunately, we're only a small percentage of the housing throughout the state of Wyoming. So when, you know, in our world, you know, we have all of these policies and procedures in place that, you know, yes, they're on a wait list and it may take quite a while to get into housing. They have to keep the rents restricted. Rents are based on the income limits, and only those under those income limits, or we ensure that they're only renting to income qualified households. In the private sector, all around the state of Wyoming, in every county and city that we have, there are private owners and they can charge whatever they want for rent. So when you have a competitive market, they can absolutely charge higher rents when they want to, if it is not, you know, affordable housing funded by, you know, the state or the federal government.
Okay, I had another question. I'm sorry, maybe I
No, please go ahead, Sally.
So you're saying, so you have a complaint about you feel like you've been discriminated against and you are not getting this apartment or house because of your race or what else, or your sexual orientation, or, something like that. And so who evaluates if they think you have a valid complaint? Because just from my own personal experience, it's really weird having a white person tell you that there is no racial discrimination in the workplace. And, I just want to know, especially if they don't even work there, they're just evaluating. But, and I've asked people when they say that, well, how would you know? You're not an ethnic minority, you're not LGBTQ, you're a white person. That sounds really racist, but I do wonder about that, because I've had a lot of people say, we're just really fortunate in Wyoming because there's no racism. I just think
Laurie, any thoughts on that question? Who would evaluate the complaint that would come to you?
So HUD, we refer everything to HUD. We are not the the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and we're not the Office of Fair Housing here in the state. So we receive the complaint. We work with the owners, managers, and then we educate the resident if they're the one reaching out with the complaint on how to file a complaint with HUD. HUD makes all of those determinations. HUD makes all of those decisions. They create the conciliation agreements, or they actually will charge those that they find that are that indeed are guilty of discrimination. That's one of the reasons I believe that, as I said, the other speaker is correct, that we do need a central location, because we do have to send them to Region 8 down in Denver.
Great, thank you, Laurie. Any other questions? Sally, any further follow-up questions? Okay. Anyone else? Any questions from the public? We take public questions as well now. Well, great.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Just
Kayla.
questions to the public.
Oh, okay. Not yet then. Sorry. Just comments. So, okay. Thank you so much. Laurie, thank you so much. We appreciate it. That was a really helpful presentation, as
Thank
well
you.
as Laurie Urbigkit. So thank you both. Our final briefer today. Thank you, Representative Storer. Representative Liz Storer is the representative from District 23 in the Wyoming House. I'm pleased and happy and proud to say that Liz is my representative where I live in Teton County. So she's been kind of gracious enough to spend some time with us talking about housing discrimination in Wyoming. Representative Storer.
Thank you, Chair O'Brien. It's great to be with you all, and I have just learned a lot from listening to the other presenters today. My name is Liz Storer. I represent House District 23. That's here in Teton County. And I'm a freshman, so I'm new to the legislature. I was elected in 2022 and have just served my first session. So I will defer to some of the speakers, the previous speakers, and the history of what has happened with the bill. Obviously, and just would like to make just a few comments, I think, that might be helpful. And then also talk a little bit about what we are seeing here in our community. Obviously, the issue of housing is front and center for all of the state, and the legislature is attempting to address that better, has put a modest amount of funding into housing. But I think to the point that Laurie Gray made, when there's not enough housing to go around, it does allow people to discriminate more easily, because they can just make different choices for who they're going to sell a house to or to rent to. And I think I'm particularly concerned about the rental community here. That seems to be one of the places where we know we just don't even have adequate housing. And in many cases, the housing that is available to people is so enormously expensive that we have, 3 and 4 families living together in a very tight space, or people are commuting together and essentially gone from their homes if they're traveling into the community to work. But they end up sharing rides. We also don't have enough public transportation, I would say, to help our workforce. So not having that enough housing available does certainly make it easier to discriminate. And I just think, just like, Wyoming's a very big state. People do learn how to navigate agencies within the state, but then going to a federal agency and asking for help there, I think does make it extremely difficult for a lot of folks to not be able to really find relief when they feel like they have been discriminated against. So making it work so that we do have someone here in the state of Wyoming who can respond to that. I would second Laurie Urbigkit's comments about the idea that the Office of Consumer, I forget what the name of it, consumer complaints. That's not what it is. But anyway, that makes sense for where we could put this. That most state government actually is quite accessible to the people of Wyoming, and they learn how to navigate that better. I would also echo Laura's comments, though. She frankly would know better than me that the idea that if we were to try to amend in the discrimination language regarding gender, that might not work well at the legislature. Currently, we have a lot of people who do not seem to be supportive of gender rights at the moment. And so better to do this through a rules and regulation process. It sounds like that there is a path forward. We just need to figure out how to get that done. And I don't know whether I actually am still a little bit confused why it hasn't happened yet, whether it's just kind of fallen through the cracks administratively, and maybe we could talk about that. But if we're the legislature to, having passed the bill, maybe lean on the administration to get it done, that could be something we could do that might actually be helpful. But I think, it might be a bit problematic trying to bring that legislation through the legislature at this point in time. It'd be better to do it rules and regulations. Certainly this year with a budget session, I think that would be particularly hard. I can also just address that the question, I think it was Judy's question about rentals for short-term housing. What we're seeing here, because of the values, most of the community is not allowed to do, quote, short-term housing less than 30 days. What we are seeing, though, in some places is home owners will rent for a period, will use a 30-day lease. They may actually lease it for less time, but they can make enough money leasing it for just 1 week out of a month to be both legal in the rest of the community where short-term is not allowed. And it takes that unit out of the pool for full-time residents. So that's another way that we're reducing our, that is having some impact. There's some, quite, there's homes and across town and throughout a lot of neighborhoods that you're seeing that happen. And we haven't been able to figure out how to keep it from happening. And I think that's about all I have to say. I'm happy to answer whatever questions I could, even though this is not my area of expertise per se, other than to tell you how difficult housing is in my community.
Yeah, well, I'd second that. That's for sure. Well, one question I'd have, Representative Storer, and that is, Laurie Gray said enforcement is on along the lines of $80,000, and assume it's somewhere in that range. Maybe it's not 80, maybe with inflation it's now 100, or even double that, say, just to make it easy, $200,000. In terms of the state budget, is that a number that seems feasible to be able to say, even if we can't get HUD funding, we could still afford $200,000 to hire someone to allow people to get enforcement here and not have to go to Denver?
Yes, I mean, I do think, my sense is that was the intent of the legislation. And I will talk to, I'll actually see Speaker Summers in about an hour. So I'll ask him if he recalls this. He's had a lot of experience. I mean, it's certainly within, we have, I think it is, we were just looking at it last night. Our annual budget's about $5 billion for the state. And this would seem like a reasonable way to spend a couple $100,000. I guess I'm curious, and again, maybe, well, Laurie or Urbigkit, I guess, is not on. I'm still not quite, I don't understand why this hasn't happened yet, I guess is what I'm asking. And Jim, I don't know whether you can help illuminate that. Why it hasn't.
I think that we've asked that question quite a bit. And I don't think anyone is purposely not appointing anybody. I just think it hasn't been done. And maybe it's a matter of helping create some momentum to get it done.
Right. So thinking about how we might do that, the Office of Consumer Affairs, it is, as I recall, a fairly new organization to the agency, to the state. And there are some lawmakers that are not supportive of it. I don't know why. I don't know why consumer protection is not something that we all can believe on, no matter where we fall on the political spectrum. But in any case, I think articulating the need, being able to articulate that need specifically is helpful to then get action.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Other questions from the committee? Anyone else have a question? No? Okay, Liz, thank you so much. Thank you for joining. I know you're off on to another event, so we really appreciate that you did. Thank you very much. Thank
you, and do let me know how I can be helpful in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Certainly will.
Bye.
Great. So now I think we can say, since that concludes the last of the question and answer sessions, now, Kayla, would it be appropriate to ask for public comment?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay. Oh, I missed out on introducing folks properly as I'm reading through. Sorry about that. Any public comment? No. Okay. I will note that Kayla properly prepared a script that included an introduction of the background of each of these speakers, which were very impressive, and I really should have gone through it. So Kayla, I apologize for that. Maybe we can go ahead and just excerpt out a part of those and place it in the record. So the background of each of our presenters is properly included, which I really should have done. Is that appropriate to do?
Yeah, no
With leave of the
problem.
committee?
No problem.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so just by way then of next steps and sort of closing remarks. Thank you all. That's our fourth briefing. I think we are getting to the stage now then, where we've already called for public comment. We're getting to the stage now where we can, I think, deliberate on the comments and start coming up with what we think would be the recommendations we'll make. I think some hope seem now have come clear, and then ask Kayla to prepare a report of our recommendations. And so if that makes sense, I think we may have other comments that we receive. The public record will close, I think, Kayla, 30 days after this last briefing. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yep. So if anybody submits comments within the next 30 days, that would become part of the public record. It doesn't mean that we can't consider other comments, and it doesn't mean that we can't, include in our discussions other things that we think would be important. One area which I know we're still sort of searching for input on is on input around tribal representatives. We've reached out to the folks that Gail mentioned the last time. We'd hoped they joined today and they couldn't, but we'll continue to try and see if we can't get some tribal input too around some of these issues. And even if that comes in after the 30-day close of the public comment period, we'd have an opportunity to consider those comments as well in our deliberation. So at least the way I'm thinking about it would be, we would have a business meeting sometime, in the next several months, in which we would go through at least what we all collectively think would be our preliminary thoughts and ideas on recommendations and conclusions and findings of fact. And then after having outlined those, we'd ask Kayla to prepare a draft of it, which we would then consider at our next meeting and kind of go through it in some detail. If in the meantime, sometime soon, we think that it would be useful to have another briefing, or if other persons come to attention who would like to present to the committee, I think that we could, figure out a way we could do that, and certainly take their comments in writing if we can't hear them personally. But that's what I'm kind of thinking, but I'd like to open it up for discussion. Anyone, any comments on that approach, given where we are with after 4 briefings now?
James, I guess my only question, this is Laurie Gray, is would you like me to email you the my contacts at both the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho housing authorities to see if anyone there would be interested in speaking with you?
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. That'd be super.
Okay, great. I'll go
Please
ahead and
do.
do that then after this meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll follow up on it. But more broadly, just now moving to a report, does the committee think we've gotten enough input now that we're ready to go to recommendations based on what we've heard so far, or should we hold it open and continue to look for additional presenters? Knowing that we're going to try and get some tribal input, even if by way of written comment.
I think if we could get the tribal input, that would be fantastic in ensuring that we cover as broad groups as possible. But I do feel we are somewhere in an area of saturation to some extent. So I agree with you. It seems to me that what we're picking up now, there are new forms of discrimination rather than the original traditional blatant areas of discrimination that we're familiar with. So I'm there with you. I think we are spot on in collating what we have, and I think we could have, we have something meaningful, we could deduce something meaningful from what we have already collected.
Thank you, Valerie. I appreciate that. That's good points. Maybe if you don't mind, we'll just quickly run around the committee members. Judy Shepherd, your thoughts on this one?
I'm afraid I have missed so many of the hearings that I'm only familiar with this one, but it seems like the people you have called and the other ones that I have seen their names, that I tend to agree with Valerie that I don't know who else we would ask these questions of. So I'm in favor of moving forward with what we have rather than inviting another committee. I also agree that getting the tribal information would be really important.
Thank you, Judy. Just one quick thing on that. Kayla and Liliana, I know we've gotten transcripts from each of the briefings, and we'll get one from this one too. Would it be hard to sort of pull those together and circulate those to the committee members so everybody at least has it right at hand, the transcripts from the previous briefings, particularly if there's a question that comes up and people want to look back and say, what did so-and-so say?
Of course, yeah, no, that would not be a problem at all, and we can easily do that.
Okay, so Judy, why don't we get you those two, and that way, if there are follow-up questions you may have after reading those transcripts, we could reach out to the particular people and have them, if they care to respond and provide some additional input.
Well, that would be very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. Sally, your thoughts on it?
Yes, I would very much like to have tribal input, especially since, every time I ever ask about things about the tribe is we cannot do this or we cannot do that because that's under the auspices of the tribe. And I do know that their houses or what they live in is serious. There's something seriously wrong with some of their housing. I mean, there should be some minimum requirements, shouldn't there, even if it's under tribal jurisdiction?
I assume the Fair Housing Act, for example, will apply, Sally, in the tribal areas regardless. So there are certainly some things like that, but that's a good question, and probably deserves to be answered. Absolutely. Okay, so your point's well taken. When Laurie Gray sends along that information, I will follow up with or Kayla and Liliana, and I will follow up with those folks and see if we can get some additional input. And I'm a little hesitant if that would be the only person briefing. It might be tough to set up a time, but maybe we could ask them to send something in writing. But if they're willing to, maybe we just do a quick 30-minute to hear from them. I mean, I'd certainly be willing to do so. Kayla, I don't know how hard it is. You have to go through the notice process and scheduling and so forth. It seems easy to us, but my guess is it's not quite so easy.
No, I think we can accommodate that. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. But can we, Kayla, in terms of keeping the public record open, can we do so today and not start the 30-day clock until after we can sort of run this to ground?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking, but yeah, I think that's totally fine to leave it open.
Okay. All right, well, let's do that. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and if we could circulate another poll for a time we can have another business meeting. And at least what I'd hope to do in anticipation of that meeting is sketch out the 3 or 4 things that would seem to be findings of fact and 3 or 4 things that would be our recommendations, and be ready to discuss it. And if everyone else, if there are 1 or 2 or whatever number of things that you have that you might say, gee, I really think these are important facts we should put as part of our findings or important recommendations, please write those down or be prepared. We can discuss those and get them organized into our report. Excellent. Any other comments from committee members, both with this plan or generally with respect to the briefings or additional briefers? Any additional input from the committee? No. Okay. Kayla, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. Is there anything I missed? Like, for example, introductions of all of the speakers is a good example.
No problem, Tim. No, I think that's all.
Okay. Well, may I have a motion to adjourn then?
So
Excellent.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Judy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Excellent. Thank you so much. Another good briefing. Really appreciate your time. And I'm really excited we're making real progress. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You bet.
Bye, everyone.